Lisa Dickey here from Dickey's Cooking School, and today I am going to show you how to make a great loaf of no-knead bread. First, let's cover the ingredients you need. You need lager beer. You can use Creemore, you could use Budweiser, Miller Lite, anything you like, any lager that you like. You need salt, sea salt, kosher salt, excellent. You need yeast, you need flour, all-purpose, you need regular old boring white vinegar, and finally you need cooking spray, and that's only when it comes to baking it. And that's it. Hey there. Okay, so before we talk about the tools you need to make this bread, I'm going to take a quick detour and we're going to talk about yeast. If you don't remember the last time you used the yeast in your cupboard, it could be dead. Yeast is actually a live culture. So if you have yeast and you want to make sure it's live and it's going to properly inflate your dough, then this is a quick, easy test ahead of time. So the two things that yeast loves more than anything else in the world is warmth and sugar. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some yeast, teaspoon of yeast and a teaspoon of sugar in a dish. We're going to add some warm water. We're going to give it a little bit of a whisk, and we're going to just let it sit there. Within a few minutes, you'll know right away between the combination of the warm water and the sugar, your yeast is going to do what's called bloom. And that means it's going to start to rise and bubble and create this kind of gray, sludgy stuff on top. But that tells you that it is alive and ready to work. It'll also smell yeasty, surprisingly enough. So we're gonna give that a few minutes. I know this yeast is live because I cook this bread all the time, but I'm gonna show you what it looks like in just a bit. Okay, so now let's talk about what we need to make this bread, tools. This is what beautiful foamy yeast looks like. It's got this gorgeous film, there's lots of bubbles, smells yeasty. That's what your yeast needs to look at, like foamy, bubbly. You can actually see the yeast little granules bursting and floating to the surface. That tells you that you're ready to make bread or something else delicious. Okay, tools you need. You need a thick mixing bowl to make your bread. It needs to sit on the counter for 18 hours after you make it, so you need a nice deep bowl. This is just a cheap one from the dollar store. You can use anything you want. If you do a double or a quintuple batch, you're gonna need 2 bowls because it has to have space to rise. Okay, to cook it, you need to cook your dough in what's called a Dutch oven. So a Dutch oven is just a very deep, heavy pot with a lid. If you have a deep, heavy pot but don't have a lid, you can lay a cookie sheet on top, okay? If you don't have a deep, heavy pot, you can use a cast iron pan, and you can use one of these cheap bowls to, that will be your lid. And so there's room for the boule to rise in the oven, and then you've got this nice lid so it will help it steam. The last thing you need is parchment paper. When you bake your bread, you're gonna line your Dutch oven or your cast iron pan with parchment paper, and then you're gonna spray it with cooking spray, and your boule is gonna go right on top. And that's all you need. Very straightforward. Oh, last thing. If you have a Dutch oven and it has plastic handles, you may not use it because you will melt the handles off and it stinks and is disgusting. And that's it. Now we're gonna make the bread. Okay, let's talk about your ingredient measurements. If you make a single batch, this is what you need. You need 3 cups of flour. You need 1.5 teaspoons of sea salt or kosher salt. You need a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. You need a tablespoon of vinegar. You need 3/4 of a cup plus 2 tablespoons of warm water. And you need 6 tablespoons of beer. And it's a good idea to pour your beer out, let all the foam settle out, and then measure it that way. Okay, so now if we do a quintuple recipe, which is what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna show you how to measure your flour, and then we'll go through the quantities. Okay, so the most accurate way anytime to measure flour is to weigh it. This recipe doesn't call for a weighted flour, but the next best way to measure flour, if you're not gonna weigh it, what you're gonna do is you're gonna use 1 scoop to pour your flour into another scoop and then level it off, okay? So for a quintuple batch, we need 15 cups of flour. We need 7.5 teaspoons of salt. We need 1 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. We need 5 tablespoons of vinegar, or 75 mils. And for lager, we need 450 mils. And then we need 1,050 mils of water. But there is a little hitch. This can of lager is 474 mils. So what am I gonna do with that 25 mils? I'm gonna do nothing with it. I'm gonna dump it into this. So in this case, for this recipe, because of this can size, some lager will be 455 mils, and so then I would just use the whole amount. So in this case, instead of doing 1,050 mils of water, I'm gonna do 1,025, and then I'm gonna do 474 mils of the lager. Okay, so I'm gonna start measuring out all that flour. Okay, now we're gonna put it all together, okay? So for this quintuple batch, I have 7.5 cups of flour in this bowl and 7.5 cups of flour in this bowl. Now I'm gonna add 3 3/4 teaspoons of salt and 2/4 teaspoons and 1/8 of a teaspoon of yeast, and the same thing in this bowl. Okay, now it's a good idea to mix this up, so I'm just gonna use a whisk. You only use the whisk when you're mixing the dry ingredients. As soon as you start adding liquid and you use this whisk, it's gonna get completely gummed up and it's super gross to clean out. Okay, so that's 1. And then number 2, we're just gonna give it a quick whisk. Okay, we want the yeast all mixed in throughout. Okay, now for our wet ingredients, we have 2.5 tablespoons of vinegar, 2.5 tablespoons of vinegar. Now for our beer, so it's 474 mils of beer, so it's basically 235 mils each. And we discovered, I guess the reason why the Betty Crocker measuring cups from Dollar Store are so cheap is because the measuring is actually inaccurate. A cup is not 235 mils, it is actually 250, but this is perfect for the purposes of this recipe. So we're gonna pour this off, your beer off. You wanna pour it slowly and slip it over the side, just so you don't get a big foamy head. There we go. There's 1, and there's 2. There we go. We're just going to even this out. I'm just going to ballpark it and do about half in that one and in that one. And then the last one is we need 1,025 mils of warm water. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to measure out 4 cups, and then we're going to throw in a tablespoon of water each, and that's going to be about right. So I'm just going to pour off to the 2-cup mark. There we go. And then we'll add a tablespoon each, and we're done. And that's it. Now, we're going to use the spatula. And you're just going to combine it. Again, this is no knead bread. You're not pulling it out on the counter. You're not kneading it for 15 minutes. There is no proofing, so you're not rising and punching it down. It's really basic. So you're going to get to the point when you're doing all you can just with a spatula, and then that last little bit you are going to have to work it over with your hands. But this is pretty much where you want it. It's a pretty rough, shaggy dough, and then the last little turn, you're just going to make sure any kind of loose flour is incorporated. So we'll do that at the end. That wet flour actually really grosses me out. I hate cleaning it. Now we're gonna combine this in. So I'm just gonna show you how to do that, and then I'll get the plastic wrap out, okay? So I'll do the last little finish.
Sorry, do you want me to cut it?
What's that?
Do you want me to stop it?
Oh yeah. Okay, so this is your dough is pretty much done. You're gonna give it a couple of turns in the bowl. Anything that won't really incorporate, just let it go, okay? Because that's pretty much it there. And then let's do it to this one. There's a little bit on my hands. I'll get that off. And what's left over in the bowl, that's not going to go in. We can just dump that out. Okay, I'm going to show you something you can do with that to clean up your hands. Okay, now this, all you're going to do is cover this with plastic wrap. Can we cut that and start again? I'm gonna wash my hands. Okay, you're gonna cover this with plastic wrap. If you have the reusable beeswax cotton wraps, you can totally use that. You just wanna trap the moisture and trap the heat and allow it to rise. This is going to sit on your counter covered. It doesn't have to be in a hot place, just on your counter covered for 18 hours. And then I'm gonna show you how to bake it. Okay, so your dough has taken 18 hours to raise, and now you're like, I want to eat some bread. Not quite so fast. What you're going to do with your dough, so this dough has been taken from the fridge, but even if it's your dough straight from the counter, this is what you're going to do. You're going to grab like a big, like a healthy grapefruit size of dough. This is cold from the fridge. It needs to sit for 2 hours. Even your dough that's room temperature, you're gonna wanna allow it to sit for at least an hour, okay? You get your dough. I did this a bit backwards, but you guys are gonna coat, right? I'm gonna coat, you're gonna coat. Spray the bottom of your parchment paper with some cooking spray. Okay, I'm gonna put your dough on top, okay? I'm gonna take a sharp paring knife, and I'm gonna make a little cut in the top because it looks pretty when it rises. That's all you're gonna do, see? Nice little cut there. Then you're gonna grab some flour and you're going to sprinkle it on top, and that gives you that really beautiful powdered finish. You're gonna get a little, some of the flour is gonna get darker, and it just looks like a really beautiful loaf. That is going to sit near your oven for about 2 hours. You're gonna preheat your oven to 425, okay? Once it's completely preheated and it's sat for 2 hours, you're gonna put it on the lowest rack of your oven. You're gonna cook it for 30 minutes covered, sealed. Then the last 15 minutes, you're gonna take the lid off, and presto changeo, you're gonna have a beautiful loaf of bread. Optimal settings is you let it cool again for 2 hours. But if you're like me and you like nothing more than hot bread with a lot of butter all over it and some honey, then I'd say go for it. And that's that. Now, what if you want to make pizza? If you want to make pizza, you are not going to use your bread that has just risen after 18 hours. It's room temperature and it's going to be too thin and warm to put in the oven. Okay, so step number 1 is you need that bread cooled. So I would cool it in the fridge for 2 hours. Okay, step 2 is you're going to preheat your oven at the highest setting you have, and you need something that's called a pizza stone. And that pizza stone is going to be in the oven the entire time, getting super warm and absorbing the heat. Okay, it stays in the oven. You do not remove it from the oven and with your hands put pizza on top, your pizza dough on top, unless you are super happy with having your hand covered in awful sore heat blisters. Okay, you can't do that. It's just not safe. So you need a pizza stone, and that's in the oven really hot. Now, if you're using a pizza stone, I would also recommend a pizza peel. Okay, so that just allows you to lay it into the oven without getting it super close, and you're gonna reduce any chances of getting burnt. But if it were me, I could still manage to burn myself because that's my skill level. Okay, last step. To lift a thin little pizza onto a pizza stone and slide it into the oven, the easiest way is to use a little piece of parchment paper. So I got pre-cut circular parchment papers just because it's easy. But of course you could just lay a piece of square parchment paper, roll your dough on top of that, and then the pizza peel slides underneath. So when you're rolling out your dough, you need about the size of a clementine, okay? You're going to flour the surface. Before you start rolling, you're gonna make sure your dough is covered top and bottom, okay? You don't want it sticky. Okay, any extra flour, don't worry about it, it'll just dust off, okay? So what you're gonna do is you can just sort of start to work it out with your hands at first. You don't need a whole lot of heavy rolling. You don't even, frankly, need a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, do you have a bottle of wine? Do you have a heavy can? Wrap it in some parchment paper or some film or something, or scrub it. Now, so that's sort of rolled out. So now I'm gonna take some more flour and I'm gonna dust my rolling pin because I'm gonna use that wine bottle for something else. And I'm gonna roll it out. So what you do is you're gonna roll it one way and then you're gonna give it a turn and you're gonna roll it another way and you're gonna give it a turn and you're gonna even it out. And you want it thin. Thin like 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit thicker. Like that. Once it's all rolled out, you're gonna take your fingers and you're gonna make a little, just a little edge. Like that. Then you're gonna add your sauce or no sauce, any toppings you want. Obviously it's pretty thin dough. Don't load it with toppings. And that's it. Then you just very easily slide it onto your peel, slide it into the oven, and at 500 degrees, depending on your oven, it's gonna cook in about 5 to 8 minutes. And that's it. Super duper delicious pizza. And that's everything. So, while we're all stuck at home for coronavirus, here, why don't we stop there? We'll back that up and we'll go through the setup. Well, I hope you enjoyed our bread making video. And because we're all stuck inside with coronavirus and we're self-isolating, my daughter and I are going to be making a series of videos over the next 2 weeks. So if you have lard or butter, why don't you get it in the freezer, because tomorrow's episode will be all about biscuits and making pastry. We're going to follow that up with some soup and some cinnamon rolls. If there's something that you really want to learn how to cook, please throw a comment or send me a line and we'll do our best to incorporate it. Stay safe and wash your hands as though something really disgusting is on them.